Ready?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I got a special guest today here. I got Sang Kim. He's my good friend. He's north of the border. He's in Canada, and he recently sold his company, Rolla Health. Sang, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing awesome, Jordan. Thank you for having me today. And I always love chatting with you because we have some amazing discussions. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on because Sang isn't just a business expert. He's also one of these guys who goes running in negative 50-degree weather. He's all over the place. He goes rock climbing. He's adventurous. We've had great times. But Sang, where does your story start? Where does this all begin for you?
Well, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, I grew up in the Bronx of Toronto called Scarborough. And back then, I was a new immigrant. I was 4 years old coming from South Korea and, dealing with bullying, dealing with, poverty and basically it's subsidized housing, right? And on the streets, you had to learn to be tough. And, and I didn't know how to be tough until later on when my brother introduced me to sports. But you can just picture Kim's Convenience on Netflix, and that was sort of my life story, And actually, my dad did have a Becker store near the actual store, Kim's Convenience, on Parliament Street in Cabbagetown, Toronto. So I grew up in a variety store, ate all the junk food, and I was a fat, obese kid, right up until
Yeah.
I was 11 years old. And thank God my older brother, he was very active. He was into sports. He was into football, wrestling, and rugby. And one day he told me, saying, if you keep going like this, you will be dead in no time. So as that 11-year-old
That's
kid, I just, it hit me hard, right? That's the way I interpreted it. I said, well, I better, what do I do, John? My older brother. Well, you know what? So he signs me up for competitive soccer. We lose every game. And then he signs me up for wrestling. In grade 7, I started to wrestle and then and played competitive football. And then this was the beginning of the journey. And once I got into shape, and we had competitions amongst the 3 boys. So I have an older brother, younger brother as well, and we would do push-ups and sit-ups every day. 100, 200 push-ups,
I
right? Yeah,
absolutely love. I love that because it's so important, and a lot of the time we don't realize how critical it is to the people around us. You know what I mean? Like we're the
yeah,
5 people who we spend the most time with. So you at 11 years old being called, hey man, like you got to pick it up. Like who gets a wake up call like that? Usually it's someone at 60 years old when their doctor
yeah,
goes, saying it's time to figure it out. And you're like,
yeah,
I thought, so that's incredible. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. It was wonderful, and I love my brothers dearly. I mean, we've become closer and closer as we've gotten older. But my older brother was like a father figure because my parents were working at the variety store 14 hours a day, just trying to put food on our table, right? And if it wasn't for him to get me into sports, there's no way I would be where I am today and gone through all the experiences I have, right? And it was, yeah, that moment in time when I thought, this is where you can use fear in a good way. You don't want to live in fear, but if you can use fear to catapult yourself to a better physical state, and I think that's an important message, right? Like when we're not in a good mood, we're not happy. I mean, I've learned this from Tony Robbins, right? Change your state, right? Move the body. It could be go for a walk. Don't make decisions when you're in a negative or poor state, low energy state. So the principle there is to raise your energy through movement, physical activity. And that stuck with me because I never wanted to be that chubby 11-year-old fat kid ever again, eating junk food,
Yeah.
every
And
single day.
absolutely, yeah. And what you're saying is so profound because there's a lot of us that are working and we sit at the computer 10 hours a day, don't get up. And all saying here is like, just go on a walk, just get outside, get sunlight, change the focus, change the energy, and it will change your whole mentality. Like, when you get around these people that are higher energy, it's funny because I remember saying we went to breakfast one morning and you're like, bagels, those are energy takers. Don't have a bagel in the morning. You need to
Yeah,
get the right fuel. And it's so true. And it's
yeah.
crazy that 11-year-old, that one day impacted so much of your life.
Yeah, yeah. It was the beginning of so many things that went my way, and it is a critical time, right? Because you get influenced by different people, and thank God my older brother was there to make that difference. And then exercise becomes addictive, right? So, and I'll be vulnerable here. Like, I didn't know it at the time, but I've been diagnosed with adult ADHD a number of years ago, and I look back, and people with the ADHD, I mean, we can get hyper focus on things, right? And this idea of getting addicted to things, right? It's a fine line. So you've got to pick a good addiction like exercise. And thank God at that point, my addiction was feeling good, and it was
Yeah.
through exercise. Because if I had gotten into drugs, like in the, it could have gone the other way and got my dopamine hits that way, right? So,
I
it was such an important decision at that time.
Absolutely, and there's so many people that I know that I'm friends with that are around that are all age groups that choose the easier dopamine hit, which might be drugs, it might be alcohol, it might be gambling, it
Yeah,
might be anything. And
yeah,
Stang's just saying that if we can find a positive dopamine hit, that can be a supplement. It's a habit changer. You know what I mean? So instead of
yeah,
doing one thing, we're doing it for another, and it helps us live longer. It helps us feel better. It helps us get
yeah,
that proper excitement. So I
yeah,
think that's a huge, huge
yeah.
take. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important to know that we all can change in an instant, right? It's one of those things where, you could be thinking about something for a decade and a decade, but once, and in an instant moment, you decide. You decide in that moment, and you can change your entire life in that moment, because it wasn't a second to change that. It was all that time before and all those experiences that get you to that moment in time when you decide to make a change. You decide to exercise. You decide to apply for another job. You just decide to leave that job because you're really unhappy with the cohorts and the people around you, the negative energy, right? So it's that moment of decision, and it can happen very quickly. All right. So it's never too late to make a transition, a change, a decision, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good reminder because there's so many of us that feel as if our lives are permanent. Like, I will always be in this position forever. And it's
Mhm.
just not true. There's so many different variations that go on, and there's so many times that these decisions happen. So we know that you had your decision when you were 11. What other decisions have you had in your life that have been really monumental?
Yeah, yeah. And actually, because I was getting into better shape, right? So so when I was 12, all of a sudden now, we're running around on that soccer field, even though we lost every game, right? And I was pretty determined, even as a fat kid, because I grew up in Scarborough, right? Getting bullied and
Yeah,
getting into fights, and my brother had to rescue me a number of times, right? And it just makes you really tough and more determined. So as I got into better shape, it was like, so I got into grade 8, and in grade 8, I made a decision. One of these moments where, now it's my second year of wrestling. I won the city championships, in grade 8, right? And it was just like, wow, I feel good. You know what? I got to get out of the ghetto here. This is not serving me well. So
yeah,
I made a decision to become an A student, and to become a national wrestling champion, right? Everything just came to me, and I said, well, that's how I'm going to get out of the ghetto. And then I can go to university. If I can get an A average, I don't have any money. My parents don't have any money, but we'll figure it out. I figured that was my ticket out, right?
Well, I love that in eighth grade, the intentionality, because people don't realize how much pressure is happening when there's families of it, like when there's immigrant parents. Like Gary Vee talks about it a ton, where he's just like, you don't understand. They work and they work all the time. And there's no, hey, let's have family time. Like there is family time a little bit, but it's the business and it's tough being there. And you got to like make your own decisions, but it builds grit. It builds that grit and that character that you're really talking about. So I love the fact that in eighth grade, you thought, hey, 4 years, 6 years in the future, I'm going to be able to be in the right place when I need to be. That's so huge.
Yeah, when you make a decision and you're super focused, like I remember in high school, I was my first real girlfriend. I was in grade 11, she was in grade 10, and I thought, you know what, it's actually a distraction. I don't know, because I can't focus on too many things, right? So I had
Yeah.
school and I had wrestling, and to have, at that time, to have a girlfriend, that'd be like three things I have to focus in on. And I just thought, that's not going to work out. So I ended up breaking up with her, because my goal was to become a national champion, right? And it's interesting, because the other pivotal moment was getting introduced to the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, right? And I forget, I don't know how that got in my hands, right? But that was like around grade 9, when and in the chapter on visualization, I forget what chapter that was. So in grade 9, I was visualizing being a national champion, right? All the way through. And fortunately, I had great coaches and a lot of grit. And yeah, I ended up winning the national wrestling championships all the way up until I was 18, right?
Oh, wow.
That entire journey, right? And because we had really good coaches, and I was determined to get out of the ghetto, right? And very,
Yeah.
very focused, right?
Yeah.
So
And people, yeah. And I love that because there's a lot of people who don't even have that perspective of, hey, this kid's actually a really good athlete because he wants a better life for himself, or he really enjoys the sport, or he's really like, that's what I love about it. Because not too many people look under the shell of like, why is he doing this? Why is he working so hard? So I appreciate the vulnerability.
yeah, it was, but it was actually very simple to, this whole idea of having a balanced life. It's sort of not true, because in order to accomplish, hard things or challenging things, you're going to be off balance, right? There's no such thing as true balance, because we're constantly in flux in our lives, in our bodies, outside our lives, you know. So really, it's sort of like, okay, what's most important, right? At that
Yeah.
time, what do you need in these time periods to get to where you want to get to, right? So,
A-
you know,
Absolutely. And it's funny because my girlfriend yesterday said, me and my buddy were playing tennis, and she's like, "How'd you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't win." And she's like, "Oh, why not?" And I'm like, "The other he's done more reps of tennis than me. His
yeah,
serve was better. He
yeah,
plays tennis 3 times a week. I play once every month.
yeah,
It's obvious. It's obvious.
yeah,
Like even if I'm in better condition shape than him, it is obvious. Because here's the thing: a lot of us don't like saying it, but it's the number of reps. So if saying is putting in the reps on the wrestling mat, he's
yeah,
obviously going to do better than the kid who's sitting at home watching TV. It's
yeah,
inevitable. It's a compounding effect.
yeah. Yeah, and really the other principle that is so important is focus. We talked about physiology. It's so important to change your physiology through movement, but the other part of the triad that Tony Robbins talks about is the focus, right?
Yeah.
Where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? And what are you focusing in on? right? And
Yeah.
maybe, maybe we can focus on 3 big things at one time, right? If you're really honest with yourself, it's not 5, it's not 10. If it's, like 2 or 3 big things that you want to get done, whether if it's business, your health, and relationships, for example, right? I mean, it's challenging if you want to improve those, but if you put the focus in on those areas,
Yeah.
but you're gonna make improvements. You're gonna get the outcomes that you want, right?
Absolutely.
Careful what
Yeah,
you're
and
focusing in on, right?
that's an interesting one. Yeah, I would definitely say to the audience that everyone should sit there and reevaluate where that focus goes every single day. What is it that we're getting done? Is it the goals that we want to get done? Like, for example, I know people who want to start a business and they'll say that. And then I'm like, oh, did you fill out the paperwork? Did you talk to the sellers? Did you do anything? And they're like, nope, didn't have time. Okay, then it's not something you want to do. That's fine. But just don't say that then. Just put things in the world that you actually want to get done and take the actions because actions speak louder than words, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and absolutely. The other thing about actions that I've learned is to create a massive action plan to get the outcomes you want. And what's interesting is if you start with the end in mind, right? Like what Stephen Covey would say, right?
Yeah.
Right? What's the outcome that you want? And maybe you got 30 things on that action plan list. And sometimes all you need to do is like 3 or 4 things to get the outcome. So it's
Yes.
not a to-do list, right? It's a massive
Yes.
action plan to move you from where you are to where you want to go, right? And
Yes.
you think about the words I use, right? Massive action plan versus a to-do list. 2 different energies, right? A to-do list is, oh my
Absolutely.
God, it's too much work, blah, 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 right? But a massive action plan to get what you want, a little different energy,
Yeah, I feel like I'm running in the chair.
right?
You got me
Right?
excited.
It's
Hey,
more inspiring, right?
absolutely.
And why do you want those things, right? So knowing why is important because that will motivate you when you don't want to do it, right?
Yeah.
So to have
a-
the outcome and why you want the purpose of doing, why are you doing all this stuff? What do you want, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, right now, it's never really been an easier time because there's so many things that you can work on because you can work on after work, you can work on it during work, you can work on things all the time. You have
Yeah.
Saturday, Sunday, like so many people are going out and enjoying the moment. And it's like, okay, if you want to work on something, you can get those extra reps in, which is huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, saying what happened when you went to college?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I stayed out of trouble. I stayed out of jail growing up in Scarborough because I did have friends that, went to jail for stealing stuff, right?
Oh,
So,
wow.
oh yeah. So I went through unscathed. Became an A student and got to university, and I hit my goals. And my goal was to to get a degree so that I could set myself up with a decent job, right?
Yeah.
And so out of grade 12, I was number one ranked in my weight class in the country,
Oh,
and
wow.
a few universities were recruiting me at the time. Not that wrestling is as popular in the US versus
Yeah.
Canada, but nevertheless, like I was thinking about going to Concordia and training with Victor Zimmerman. He was the Olympic wrestling coach
Yeah.
of Canada, right?
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I had some connections there, and I was trying to make a decision between Western and Concordia, and thank God I went to Western. And not that there's anything wrong with Concordia; they have a great program and everything. But I just felt like for me, I would get an education that was more suitable for me down at University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. So that's where I went, and
I love I
yeah,
love the fact that you were able to part of your goal is to become this wrestler, right? It's to get these great grades,
Yeah.
and go to college, and you're able to do that for wrestling. And a lot of people at 18 wouldn't have the wherewithal to go, actually, I kind of like that schooling better. That might fit me a little bit better educationally, not on the wrestling front, because you're juggling two things that are very important in your life. So the fact that you
Yeah.
had the wherewithal to make that decision is pretty wild at
Yeah.
that age.
Thank you. Thank you. And when you go through a lot of pain and suffering like I did, I mean, my goal was not to make the Olympic team, right? It was just, it just wasn't my goal. And it could have been, right? But I
Yeah,
decided, I want to get a degree, and wrestling, I'm able to wrestle in college, right?
yeah.
And I had a decent career at the college level. But yeah, I mean, you just set your goals, right? And that's, and you get what
So
you want out of it, right?
So for you, when's it time to reevaluate goals? Because I know there's so many of us that have big, hairy, audacious goals.
Yeah.
And sometimes we go, maybe that's not my goal anymore. Like 3 years ago, I made that goal and maybe I hit it, maybe I didn't. But how do you view goals and how do you think about them? Or are they more anchors in the direction that you kind of want to go in?
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of context in goal setting, right? And actually I like the word outcome more than the goal, right? Because
Yeah.
the energy of achieving an outcome versus a goal. And you can talk about it different ways. For me, an outcome, it feels like, for me, energetically, you can achieve that outcome in different ways that you never
Yeah.
thought of, versus achieving that goal that's so finite. You know what I mean? Like, there's maybe your brain goes to, oh, there's only one way to achieve that goal, versus an outcome. Well, there's lots of different ways to achieve that, right?
Wow. Wow. No, that's really, really
Right?
powerful because say I want you to write like an encyclopedia of the words you what's a higher energy word for this? Because we don't think about this in our day-to-day activity, but the
Yeah,
words we say
yeah,
impact the way we act and the way we feel about ourselves. So this
yeah,
higher energy
yeah,
observations that you constantly have are
yeah,
very important.
yeah. And this leads us to the third part of that triad that Tony talks about, right? The words and the meaning that we attach to things in our lives
Yeah.
can change your life in an instant, right? And the example I would give you is, when I was 16, I was in a severe car accident where my older brother was driving me from Toronto to London, Ontario, 2-hour drive, right? And it was a late night, the night before, athletic banquet. We got up early, and actually, I was going to a wrestling tournament in
Oh wow.
to Muncie, Indiana, which I never got to, right? So he fell asleep on the wheel. The car rolled once, twice, 3 times across the
Oh my
401,
God.
which is like one of the busiest highways in North America, right? From Windsor all the way to
Yeah.
Montreal, right? And it was one of those moments where I just went, holy mackerel. And you think about it. So the meaning I attached to that incident wasn't, I'm never going in a car again. I'll never drive with my brother again because he almost killed me. Or I'm just never going to get into a motor vehicle ever again, right? So I did not attach that meaning to the accident. The meaning I attached to that was, thank God I'm alive. Thank God my brother and his friend are alive. And I'm going to live my life as if it's my last day every day, right? So the meaning attached was about living and not dying.
That's very, very powerful. It causes us to realize that anything that is valuable is finite. And life, sometimes we feel that we've been here. We hear people living to 100, 110, and it's just You think, oh, I have forever. Time's on my side. It can never end. But yet it can end in an instant. And we have to realize that finite nature and really make the most of it today, which is that's a yeah, that's huge.
And that was, I know we keep going back and forth with different timelines, but it just, that was critical. I mean, there's been a lot of trauma in my life,
Yeah.
but think about it, it's the meaning we attach to these things. For example, it wasn't a failure, it was just learning, right? It was a near-death accident, yet I will live my life every day as if it was my last day, right? Yes, I got bullied and I was fat and I ate a lot of junk food and life was tough growing up in Scarborough, and it made me stronger and grittier and prepared me for wrestling, prepared me for the fact that life is tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
So anybody listening right now should really look back on one of those painful experiences that they might have had and find that positive nature in it. Find that benefit, because there's a lot of, and even it doesn't even have to be the painful moment. It can even be our conversation as
Yeah,
we use words. I've
yeah,
seen people use the word a lot. What does a lot mean? Some people say it means three. Some people thinks it means 100. Some people thinks it means 100,000.
yeah,
So you need to get to the definition of words, because words really have limitations when we talk to people. So we
yeah.
can interpret things so many different ways, and that's why the check-ins are so powerful.
Yes, absolutely. So really, I mean, we've covered those, we've covered, changing your physiology, changing your focus, and the words and the meanings that we attach to things are so important. And knowing that life is always happening for us and
Yeah,
not to us.
yeah.
So life is happening for us and not to us. And if you think about that and ponder that and possibly meditate over that, and you go deep with that, it will start to make sense that life is always happening for us. It's this journey.
Yeah,
We're all on this beautiful journey, whether if it's 80 years old or 120 years on this earth, right? But it's always happening for us,
a-
and we're learning.
absolutely. Yeah, say you are. I don't think I've ever had a podcast, yes, that has dropped this much knowledge in such a brief period of time. It's amazing, and I love the fact that literally every single word coming out of your mouth is a lesson. Then there's value from each of these lessons, and they can each be their own individual podcast. Because that get to versus have to is so different. You view the world differently. You view the activity differently. I get to go on a run today instead of I
Yes,
have to go on a run. Because
yes,
if you have to go on a run, you might not enjoy it, but you might realize that, hey, I actually have a blessing and I have the ability to use my legs and my knees are good and my joints, and I can still go and do these
yeah,
actions. Because
yeah,
there's many people who can, and we take that for granted constantly.
yeah. Jordan, you're a lot younger than me, even though us Asians age really well, right?
You look fantastic. Everyone on YouTube, he looks fantastic. For people on
But
the audio.
I look at you and I just think, oh my gosh, your awareness, right, and your curiosity, right, is so immense. And I mean, it's beautiful to see in young people like yourself, right? Because you don't see it too often, right? Most kids I call you a kid, most kids your age are playing massive amounts of video games. I'm not judging video games, right? Because it's part of our culture and there's lots to learn. And, and a lot of the billionaires in the tech sector are gamers too, right? I'm not saying all of that, but it's one of those things where you are very self-aware and your desire to learn and to grow is beautiful to see. And I think you got to continue to do podcasts and get the word out there, because we need that positive energy. We need the optimism and that self-awareness to grow. So kudos to you, my friend, because I think that's amazing.
I appreciate that. It's incredible that you noticed that, because the whole reason I started the podcast was kind of twofold. Learning from people. It was one of these things that fit that criteria that allowed me to learn from these individuals. Because a lot of people, like me and Sang were talking earlier, he charges $750 an hour just to talk, like for any kind of coaching. So you sit there and you're like, what? Like, okay, that's tough. Like, we're gonna get an hour here because it's a win-win benefit. And then Sang also talks about like putting out that positive message in the world. And that's massive as well, because the positive messages we have, there's so much negativity in there. And that's kind of what brings me to my next point is, we talk about it sometimes, but how did you find fulfillment and happiness in your life? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that concept, where maybe they're making a great salary, but they're just bored, unfulfilled, or they're struggling to get by and just trying to make it. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, you know what? And I'm not gonna come across and say it's easy, right? Everyone has different needs, everyone has different challenges, and the context of people's lives are so unique. And an outsider looking in, most times it's just very difficult to know what's going on in that one's life, right? So I would say, for me, I've had a number of different transitions, right? And to give you some context on the transitions in my life, I went to university, graduated, and I didn't know what I really wanted to do, right? And I'm a wrestling coach too, so I'm a national certified wrestling coach, and I've coached wrestling for over a couple of decades, right? And at that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I sold insurance one year, right? And then I applied to teachers college, and then I got into teaching. So I taught math, science, and phys ed at the high school level for 5 years. And I think that was easy for me because that's who I am, right? I'm a teacher at heart, right? But deep down inside, I was not happy, right? You know, I, coming to Canada as new immigrants, right? There's an entrepreneurial spirit that was burning inside of me, right? And my wife at the time, supported my decisions. And so after 5 years of teaching, I wanted to do something else and got into financial planning. So I started taking courses to become a licensed financial advisor while I was teaching, right? Because I
Wow.
knew, yeah, I knew I was going to exit out of that, right? And it was just, yeah, I wasn't happy, right? And I have inner confidence in myself because I know whatever I focus in on, I can do, right? And that inner confidence comes from sports, right?
Yeah.
Setting these goals and achieving them, setting a
Yeah.
goal and achieving it. So you develop this confidence in knowing that you can figure anything out,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we had Brad Lee on the show probably a year or two ago, and he talked about that. He said that confidence comes from doing what you say you're going to do. And not every moment we're confident, but you can rely back on those moments. Like, I remember, as you said, that freshman year, I wanted above a 3.75 GPA, and I ended up getting a 3.8 for the entire freshman year.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I told myself I wanted to do, and I got it done.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be the moments when you're like, oh, I wanted to start on the football team, but I didn't get a start. No, because that's obviously not a moment that builds you up. You figure out the moments that built you up,
Yeah.
and then you can take that as whatever you need. It's borrowed confidence. It's take the confidence that you did once in your life and use it later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So technically I burned the boats, and started a brand new career, no clients. And
Oh, wow.
I figured it out, right? I would have
Yeah.
been, in hindsight, I would have been way smarter to buy an existing practice in financial planning. So if I were to do it all over again, I would do it smarter and
Yeah.
be more strategic, find a mentor, do more due diligence instead of just jumping in, right?
Yeah.
And it would have been 10 times easier, right?
Yes. Absolutely. But hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes we gotta do it the hard way.
yeah, yeah. That's right. That's right. So that was a transition. And then after about 7 years with this financial planning company called Asante, I hit let's say a plateau, right? And I thought, I'm working my butt off and I'm not getting the outcomes I want, right?
Yes.
So, I'm making a decent living, but not nearly where I wanted to go to. So I was looking for opportunities, and that's when I jumped ship and joined TD Wealth, a larger
Yeah.
organization. And I had a good process. I was trained by Bill Backrack in values-based financial planning. I spent a couple of weekends with his seminars, right? And so that transition took place back in 2005. And those moments of decision, right? I burned the boats and
Yeah.
wasn't getting the outcomes I wanted, so I had to pivot, right? I wish I would have pivoted earlier in hindsight, but it was the right time.
Yeah.
Right? And then from there, from 2005, and then my business grew, exponentially when I joined a larger bank. There's more social
More
proof,
support.
more
Yes.
support. Canadians love the banks. They're more secure, right? Perception of security and certainty, right? And it was easier to get larger clients with a bank in Canada.
Absolutely.
So, and then that was another decision, right? That worked
Yes.
really well, right?
Because sometimes you outgrow places.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that, but sometimes we outgrow friends too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that might be hard to think about, but it's, hey, you might not be talking to them. That doesn't mean that you're not their friend or you're not close with them, but sometimes we outgrow people. And
Yeah.
that's going to happen. The higher you want to go on the enchilada, the higher you want to go on the path, people
Yeah.
won't understand. People won't
Yeah.
get it. And
Yeah.
sometimes you got to understand that people are going to be left behind, quote
Yes.
unquote. They're still
Yes.
living their life, but it's you're doing your thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The message I would send to younger people is, when it comes to the career area, think about it this way: the more experience you have in different areas, excuse me, the more valuable you become to the marketplace. So let's say you're in the banking world and you're with one company for 20 years, right? Versus somebody else that has 4 different banking experiences, 5 years each and 20 years.
Yeah.
Guess what? The person with the 4 different experiences with 4 different banks are more valuable because now you have the knowledge, the systems and processes and their mindset from the 4 different banks. And then whatever job you get next, your perceived market value is much higher because you have learned from a lot of different sources, right? So the moral of the story is, when you're on this, let's just say, career path of some sort, take care of you, your family, right?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to jump ship to get to the next step, right? Because you can jump steps by going to another organization rather than staying with the same organization, right?
Absolutely, because it will present another perspective. It'll provide that other perspective and see from a different vantage point.
Yeah.
And Absolutely.
And once again, this is all in context, right? If you're the type of person that you find that too difficult to do, and then maybe you're the type of person to stay within one organization. But if something's telling you on the inside to say, you know what, I need more growth, right? I'm at this level and I want to get to this level. Well, you could get there faster by going to the other bank. Just jump
Yeah.
ship, and that's okay. Don't be necessarily loyal to the bank you're at.
Yeah.
Go to the next bank to get to
Yeah.
where you need to get to for you and your family. Take care of your family first, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Saying you're dropping knowledge, you're dropping the good stuff. So what would you say to someone seeking that happiness? What do you think in a real quick form? Someone how do you think about happiness? How do you think about going after that?
And once again, right? Everyone has a different version,
Situational.
situational context, and what creates happiness for one person is different than the other person. But one of the things I will say for sure for me, and I know many of my friends, progress equals happiness. Progress equals happiness. So what does that even mean? Well, when you feel like you're growing in an area, whether if it's relationships or business or your health, and you're making progress, don't you feel a little bit happier? Because, hey, you know what? Hey, I can see myself getting healthier. I've lost an extra 5 pounds, or our business has grown 20% this year versus 10%. Or, my wife and I, or my girlfriend and I, are getting closer because I'm listening better. Whatever that is for you, right? So finding that balance, whatever that means, but what I know for sure, progress is happiness for me.
I I would completely agree. And the big thing that Sang just said right there is he said that we need to find things. What I heard was we need to find things to measure. If we have things that we measure, like you start a business and you get one client, then you get two, then you get three, five, 10, whatever it is, you're seeing progress. You see progress in numbers, you see progress in value. And that's why you might have to rate things or change things, but you got to find those numbers. Staying, you are incredible. You've dropped so much knowledge. Where can people find you? Where can they hear more about you? Where can they see what you're up to?
You know, yeah, I mean, I don't have a personal website. We have sold a portion of Rolla Health, right? So Rolla Health, the name, we still own. Neil and I and our shareholders still own. But the platform, the virtual care platform, we have sold. But an email, right? I can give you my email, because right now I am between projects and I love coaching people, right? So I've got a few coaching spots limited, and a number of financial advisor clients that I have, and entrepreneurs, right, that I'm coaching. And for me, that's so much fun to see progress in themselves, right? So I love watching progress happen, right? And
I-
I get really excited about that, you know.
and yeah, and the coolest part is since Sang was able to transition from his business, selling a portion of it, he on his Instagram, he's gotten a little bit more active. So he posts videos of doing like natural cold plunges, of like running in the snow. Like he's a fitness warrior. He's rock climbing, keeps it interesting. But saying this has been amazing. I really appreciate the time, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Yeah, you too, Jordan. Thanks for having me. We always have great conversations, and I love sharing, and I learn a lot from you every time I talk to you as well. So I appreciate you and what you're doing here. And yeah, you're doing some great work. So keep it up.
Thank you.